Oh, what up, everybody? How y'all doing? Can you hear me okay? Send me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Peace, peace, peace. Cool. Kenya tuned in. Big vibes. Yeah, so what I want to start to do for you all, Eid Mubarak to everybody out there who celebrates the Islamic holidays. No, I can't really turn it up. Wait, maybe I could do this. Lloyd, what up? El Janelles, what up? How's that? Okay, so real simple. What I want to start doing is I'm not going to do it too much, but I do want to take advantage of the downtime. Even though for me, there's no such thing as downtime, constantly working. Kanye is bigger than you. Yes, he is. Abad Husseini. I had a dream about Kanye last night. Y'all want to hear about my Kanye dream? It was real talk. I had two dreams last night. One was a nightmare that woke me up, and then the other one was about Kanye. We were backstage, and he was doing a show. And I did like an interview about him and how he was like the best dressed like rapper of all time. So anyway, Abad Hussein, you're gonna get blocked, cuz don't spam. I need to leave this clean. So I'm with you. All right, see, they can't help themselves. I'm sorry, Abad, you had to get bliggitied. So I want to start doing something called summer research. What summer research is getting you an insight into what I do to prepare for the next year of classes at the various institutions in which I am a professor, teacher, lecturer, whatever you want to call it, visiting scholar, visiting professor, whatever, at the various schools in which I do that at. And so just to give you a better understanding of how that works, I teach at Johns Hopkins in the fall and the spring, so 2 semesters, but it's a tutorial system where I teach one student at a time because it's a music conservatory, the Peabody Conservatory. And at MIT, I teach in the spring. I teach a course called Rap Theory and Practice, and that course is in the spring, and it's a classroom filled with lovely students. And on that note, big shout out to all of the MIT students who have just graduated. Special shout out to Marciano, who got his master's in music technology, a new degree. Is he the first one to graduate out of that? He might be. But he's a really good guy. One of my favorite individuals at MIT. And so congrats to him. But congrats to all of the students who've graduated, whether you're at whatever school you're at, middle school, high school, college, or whatever level. So shout out to everybody who graduated and is continuing to graduate. So when summer is done for students, unless they're taking like summer internship programs or they're planning to just stay in and around the school for whatever reason, for research or what have you, if they're like grad students, whatever. But for the most part, the summer for them is their break time. But for professors such as myself, the summer could be used as break time, or it could be prep for next semester. So I like to use it for prep for next semester. At least that's what I'm kind of gearing up to do, to go back and reflect on my class and the things that I've taught, and potentially things that I want to kind of add to the course in the coming semesters. And so I look at it as this time. So I call it like summer research. And so what I want to research this summer a little bit more in depth is figures of speech, particularly rhetorical physics of speech, particularly in the English language. Even though I delve into different languages in my class, but it's mostly Japanese, and Japanese poetic traditions and Japanese rhetoric and stuff like that. But classical English, rhetorical and literary and devices and figures of speech. So what I'm doing is I grabbed me a nice little book. It's called Classical English Rhetoric, Fawnsworth's Classical English Rhetoric by Ward Fawnsworth. And I got a ton of books that relates to figures of speech and deep dives into particular physics of speech, figures of speech, etc. Deep dives into metaphor, deep dives into all manner of things, more macros like surprise and stuff like that. So there's white papers and all this other stuff that we dive into. But what I wanted to do is just have like a nice refresher, focused. And it actually started from one of my students who emailed me the other day and asked was there more material that they could do and have like a deep dive as they're focused on their songwriting and other things. And it was like, oh, I gave them a short list of the books that I have, things like Sound and Sense, things like More Than Cool Reason by, what's his name, George Lakoff and Mark Turner, etc. But then I was like, oh, yo, let's just do some straight up rhetorical deep dives. And so I picked this up. And so I'm going to start pouring through this. One way, for one reason, to just kind of have a general review of my understanding and depth of rhetorical devices, and how that relates to, and again, all this is how this relates to rap, but my basic understanding. And then to have like a deeper dive, because you can get into rhetoric and you'll start to see that there's tons of different figures. So you might just be like, what similes are, you might know what alliteration is, you might know like surface level stuff, but then you get into things that are just like things that you can't even pronounce, like Epizeuxis and Epimone and Conduplicatio, things like that. So I'm like, oh, that's all interesting, and it's a vibe because as rappers, as writers, some of the stuff we do intuitively or we do it unconsciously because we've been kind of trained unconsciously. And we use it. Sound and Sense is the name of the book, not Sounds of Science. Sound and Sense. By Perrine. I think his name, Perrine. It's a high school book. But some of the things that we do it kind of automatically. We do it without intention. We do it intuitively. We do it because we mimic things. And it's always valuable to kind of do maybe a etymological, which implies a historical deep dive into what these things are, how they're defined and where they come from, how they've been used across time. And what you start to recognize and realize is a lot of things that we do in English specifically is very, very old. So it's things and traditions that have been used for hundreds of years, that we've kind of picked up because the people that we're learning things from picked it up ad hoc from, or in a non-formal way, from just reading listening to speeches, things like the I Have a Dream speech, stuff like that. Within that you start to kind of learn and memorize, you constantly come into contact with, even if you've never heard the whole speech. There's rhetorical devices that are in there natively that we pick up and that we kind of implement in our creative work, in our non-prose work, in our poetic work. So anyway, I think it's a value to every once in a while dump and dive into the deep end of rhetorical devices, and start doing things with a little bit more intention. So some of the stuff I teach in my class already, even though I have to pare it down because the class is more focused on other things and not really giving you these really in-depth surveys of all these kind of rhetorical pieces and parts. And just to be clear, I teach in the literature department at MIT. I also teach in comparative media studies and writing at MIT, and I also teach in the music department at MIT. And there's various levels through those different, within those different fields and those different departments, where people teach and engage with different subject matters at different depths and different scales. So in some classes, you might get a really deep dive into things like particular rhetorical devices and maybe their historical aspects. In other cases, you might see classes where those things are just kind of taken for granted, and you go directly into like applications of them. and you'll start to learn those things kind of in real time or on the job or in motion, I guess you want to call it that. But anyway, doing this also, and I'll show you, I'll give you a little example of what that is in a bit. Also going back to things that I studied at Yale, online at Yale, going back to Paul Fry's highly in-depth lecture on literary theory. It was actually one of the prerequisites for SOSA members to kind of throw themselves into this lecture. It's like a 15 lecture, or maybe even more than that. It's on Yale's open courseware, where I'm also a Saybrook fellow at Yale. Shout out to all the Yaleys out there. What's going on? Saybrook. You know what it is. All the Sabrusians. So going back to that lecture, 4 to 5 years later, after teaching for 4 years, actually longer than that, because we were watching that lecture almost 8-9 years ago. Maybe not 8-9, because it's crazy, but a very, very long time ago. And so now coming back to that lecture series again, and this time as a professor, and this time as somebody who's kind of dove into the teaching aspect of these theories and teaching a class called rap theory, and going back to that course, and I've watched it multiple times, but going back to it now as a teacher, you start to pick up on language and pick up on things, and it has a different resonance and a different impact on you than when you were just kind of a student. So when you're in front of the class, it becomes like, oh wow, I see now I have a better understanding of some of these approaches and what they're trying to do and what the professor is trying to do and the routes and the ways that they're doing it. So that one is about early in the lecture, like lecture 3 is on hermeneutics. And so that's, again, another one of those foundational, it's not a rhetorical device. It's not a figure of speech. It's basically the study of interpretation and how things are interpreted. And it applies comes from religion, comes from interpreting the Bible and religious text. And what do these texts mean, and the different camps who have different perspectives on what the text should mean. Hermeneutics is from Hermes. That's hermeneutics. Hermes, the Greek god of, or Roman god of what, war, I think is Hermes. I don't know, but the god of knowledge, whatever, writing, I don't know. But that's where the phrase comes from. But it's all about interpretation and how we interpret things. And starts in religious texts, kind of moves forward into political arenas. So things like if you're studying the Constitution, if you're going to law school, you're going to do a lot of hermeneutical studies. Talk about the hermeneutical circle, how you interpret text. It's one of those foundational principles that we actually built at SOSA as well. A deep understanding of the hermeneutics and different types of hermeneutics, because it's all about interpretation, how people interpret things, and from a compositional space where you're actually creating text, knowing that the hermeneutical circle exists, or the interpretive domain exists, and then how do you write for the interpretive domain, either to control it or to preserve your particular intentionality as an author, etc. So all of that is in this Paul Fry lecture, and it goes across all these different schools of literary criticism and literary thought, literary theory, etc., and all these different things. So that's fun, going back into that, and now like getting a better understanding the third or fourth time around the corner is a vibe. So studying that, and then also deep diving into the physics and the mathematics of creativity, with things like the core conceit diffusion theory and the core conceit diffusion model, and bringing in things like diffusion equations and partial PDEs, partial differential equations, which opens up all these other fields. So constantly kind of researching that stuff. So anyway, my summer research contains those 3 approaches and more. So just a nice refresher and deep dive into classical English rhetoric, and also deep diving back into Professor Paul Fry's. I don't know if he's still alive or not, maybe, but a professor at Yale, who teaches a course on Introductory to Literary Theory, which is online on YouTube at Open Yale course, if you're interested to kind of follow along. And then also my own research into the core conceit diffusion theory and the core conceit diffusion model, and then the multi-domains that kind of spell out that. So anyway, what's in this book? What is of interest, maybe of interest to you, and kind of how I would incorporate some of these things into my upcoming courses would be this concept of repetition and repeating things for the sake of imprinting or reinforcing a point, and reinforcing a point through repetition. A lot of what we experience as in our religious circles or in our routines of life are all about repetition. So if there's repetition in action in life, you get up in the morning, you do this by a certain time, you do this by a certain time, you do this, you're out the door by a certain time, you're going to run into this, you're going to run into that, blah, 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 blah. You basically create this kind of routine. You repeat that routine, you repeat. Those actions become muscle memory, they become grounded into you. You're able to kind of create patterns, and then you're also able to break those patterns voluntarily for the sake of entertaining yourself or taking a different route or doing something new. So you have like a novel aspect, but that novelness is only a product of once you've built up all these kind of routines. But then also it's a defense mechanism because you're able to kind of understand when a pattern is being broken, when certain things are kind of interfering with your pattern, and understand that there's might be threats or stuff like that. That's a little bit more in depth, a little bit more deep. But the point being repetition and the power of repetition, and how we use repetition. And you can use it on a macro scale. And you think of repetition in songwriting, you might think of just like a chorus that constantly refrains and comes back around every 16 bars, every 8 bars, whatever your structure is, where it might be capped maybe at the front and at the end. Inclusio, maybe they call it that, I don't know, but you start with a chorus at the front and you end with a chorus, but in between it's all this kind of diversity of different thoughts and purviews and words and functions, but you cap it with these two refrains. It's a little less standard. What's more standard that you probably go with is verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus. Kind of odd. Chorus being that repeating aspect, again, to kind of reinforce the main idea. That's what your chorus does. Different from a hook, which is a different thing, but choruses can be hooks, but hooks and choruses are separate things. But that repetitive aspect, you take, and then we'll say we pull examples, again, macros of repetition. You take my song, He Say, She Say, which in itself is repetition, he say, she say. But the song itself is 2 verses. Both of the verses are the same in length. They're the same in content. The only difference is they're from two different perspectives because they're coming from 2 different people. So the pronouns are switched from he to she. And they're temporally different because the one's from an older woman, the other is from a younger child. But they're focused on the same target. With the point being that this repetition, even though it's the same, little shifts, little changes, little additions of diversity, even on the same target, are going to have different impact on that target in different ways because they're coming from different perspectives. But anyway, another example of kind of macros, we get these 2 big verses that are repeating. But there's levels to repetition, and this is where you get into things like Fawnsworth. And Fawnsworth talks about things where Epizeuxis, which is the repetition of a single word, back to back to back, like that. That's that's an example. But you would say something like brother, 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 right? With maybe this escalation across from the beginning to the end to show there's like your brother, brothers, brothers, right? That's called Epizeuxis, where you're taking one word and repeating that word back to back to back. That's also maybe an example of Epizeuxis. Then you have something called Conduplicatio, which is the same thing. A word, potentially a phrase, but we'll talk about the difference. We have a word or phrase, short phrase, but it's instead of it being back to back to back, there's words that are in between. And the great thing about Farnsworth's book is he gives you examples So he'll say this is Epizeuxis, and then he'll give you examples from existing text to show you it, and then he'll talk a little bit about the impact of that and the effect of it. Conduplicatio is it'll be again a single word or a few words that will repeat, but there's things in between. So it might be like, I am a lawyer who knows the truth. Because I am a lawyer who knows the truth, I am also a lawyer who knows the lies, right? So that's kind of like an example where you have like the alsos and the becauses and other words that are kind of breaking it apart. But again, reinforcing this identity of being a lawyer. So my definition is a little shady, but also you got the book to back it up. But then you also have something called epimone. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Epimone. Epimone is the repeating whole phrases. Like repeating phrases, like specifically phrases. Maybe there's some gray area with Conduplicatio, but epitome definitely it's like whole phrases that you're kind of repeating. And so you might see that in things like take Kendrick Lamar's what is it from Big Morale and the Big Steppers, where he says take off that scheme, take off the dot, take off the cut, take off the cut, take off the cut, take off that, right? Which is not within a chorus, it's in the body of the verse, but that's kind of an example again of kind of epimony that's occurring. So again, the power of kind of repetition, how to use repetition again in these micro phases where it's like these are the act like as simple as a single word being repeated to something expanding where you're still using single words, but you're putting other words in between it, but you're constantly coming back to that word. And then you have epimony, which you're repeating whole phrases. And then there's levels of repetition, which I won't get into crazy, but they all kind of gravitate around these kind of three structures. And there's like doublets, and where something like brother, brother, brother is a triplet. But then you might do brother, brother, which is a doublet, and go on from there, right? But you want to find like certain balances, how you repeat, when do you repeat, where do you repeat, what's the point of repetition, how does repetition become a little bit more tactical and useful in what you do, and how do you deploy it? When do you deploy it? When do you not deploy it? When do you let things kind of not repeat? And then you can, maybe with this in mind, even just from a theoretical standpoint, if you're not going to practice this or apply it from a methodological standpoint, but now you can appreciate work and look at people's work through the lenses of the rhetorical devices that they use and really see if they have the impact that the particular rhetorical device was meant to have, right? And then you can and maybe that's a little bit of a bias because you can like have some like prime, what do they call it? Recency bias, where you might say, "Oh yeah, I get it. That's how I feel," but you're feeling that in the moment. But really, you never felt that way, or maybe it will uncover why you feel or why you appreciate a particular piece of work because it is deploying these particular type of rhetorical devices, and you're having this kind of cognitive response to them. But that's what they were designed to do. Right? So that's fire. That's kind of like what the goal of kind of going back through something like this and other works, which I like this. There's another work that I'm going to do, which I'm not going to divulge to you all now because this is more for popular things, very easy. There's another work that is very, very academic, which I'll be getting into once I power through this. Paul Fry, an example, and how that relates to rap. So I'll give you examples of how repetition relates to rap. How would something like the Paul Fry, this lecture 3, and there's more lectures, but lecture 3 specifically, the hermeneutical circle, interpretation, stuff like that. How does that apply to kind of rap? One of the things that comes up in the lecture, which he brings up, which is super interesting, is playwrights. Again, and a lot of these traditions are super old, right? So they're not new by anything. Like you're not doing anything new. Like everything's kind of already been done. At least as it relates to kind of like language and the English language specifically. And a lot of stuff that we use are really just rediscoveries of things that have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, maybe in other languages that have kind of been translated over because the grammatical structures are the same, the syntactical structures are the same. But this thing about interpretation, and should things be very direct or should things be open to interpretation, right? And there's two different schools, two different points of view, and there's more, right? So there's two hands, but there's fingers on each hand, right? So there's, even within the two schools, there's all these different variation and stuff like that, and you might have half a finger, whatever. But all those open up to like different points of view on how things should be. What should truth look like? What should our text be? Should our text be using language that leads one off of the point, that allows people to have their own kind of interpretation? Should our text, when I say text, the whole scope of text, I'm speaking very semiotically when I think about text, not just a book, but like film and the world is a text, and architecture and design and everything. It's just text, right? It's just materiality, right? Organized in a certain way. And should that organization of material be something that is very public facing, meaning that the public, it's meant for wide audience and popular audiences, or should it be something very private and for the elites, and only open to those who know, or closed to those who don't know? And should the language be should this be written in Latin, and who all speaks Latin, and you have to learn Latin to understand, blah, 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 right? So it's like, should things be very basic or should things be very complex? But I hate to use that language because those are, anyway. But should it be very simple or should it be very like dense, right? And should things be simple because there's no need for interpretation? Or should things be dense because you want it to be open to interpretation? Right? But that's also a slippery slope. But that kind of piece is something that was argued about and challenged, not just now, how people say, oh, Lupe, you're too complex, or like, rapper X is too complex, or this person succeeds because they're simple, or this person succeeds because they're very direct and blah, blah, blah. But those conversations in the discourse domain have been occurring for hundreds of years, where you have, and this is an example that Paul Fry brings up in his lecture, Professor Fry, where he talks about prologues in certain plays, playwrights of, again, hundreds of years ago, 100 years ago, 1800s, whatever. They would write these prologues where they would basically be attacking other playwrights or criticizing other playwrights, saying that their work is too dense, or it's too open to interpretation, or your use of metaphor is way too open and fleeting, or what have you. Or I don't know what this means, it's too slippery, versus like my work is very direct and very to the point, and there's not a lot of, slippery meaning, polysemy and all this other polysemy and all this other stuff. So it's kind of very direct. And you have these kind of duels between playwrights, and I'm assuming they're kind of fans and legions, about should things be simple and easy to follow, easy to understand, easy to digest, and very, very much so the intentionality of the author, authorial intention, is carried through the entire piece. Or should things be made for folks to have their own understanding of it? And what does that relate to? And you'll see this kind of back and forthness in a lot of the philosophical work that was done through the 20th century, was about authorial intention, the role of the author, but all kind of seated in hermeneutics, seated in how should we interpret this? And you can apply that to things like the Constitution, even today. What does this amendment mean, right? What does this constitutional thing mean? What did the forefathers who wrote the Constitution mean when they wrote to this particular amendment, or they wrote this particular part of the Constitution or this particular part of law? How do we interpret that law? And so even again, that's why if you go to law school, you'll do a whole bunch of hermeneutical studies, even if it's not called that, interpreting the law, whether you're a prosecutor or defense or whatever area of law you choose to kind of work in, IP law, immigration law, whatever. It's going to be interpreting documents and texts and cases about how the law is framed, how the law is spoken, et cetera, et cetera. So the hermeneutical circle and hermeneutics, as it applies to rap, you can see it as being like, as a rapper, should you be creating things that are very dense and very heavy and very closed in a certain way? Meaning closed, well, I've got to be careful with that. things that other people can understand without having to interpret or project their own meaning into it. And then how do you create work that does that? Or should you create work that's very open to interpretation and very democratic in that way, or very authoritarian in that way, to use political terminology? Yeah. So that's one of the reasons of like, let me go back through Professor Fry's lectures, his Yale lectures for literary theory, and kind of bone up on that. And again, now as a professor, this might not be something that comes up in my class. I'm going to kind of distill this down to a lesson or an assignment or anything like that, maybe. But just to understand some of the again, to reinforce my own understanding of these kind of more global processes that are occurring, the hermeneutical circle, and how that impinges upon an artist's work. And again, even as a person in the audience who's not going to use this in any way, doesn't find this valuable in terms of them creating work through this kind of theory or through this lens. Hopefully, when you look at work, now you have a better understanding and a better way to appreciate and critique the work through these kind of lenses, because work has been, at least classical work in English, has been critiqued through this process for hundreds of years. Okay, so there should be no reason why we shouldn't do that now, and we do it anyway. So, and then thirdly and lastly was going back to doing more research into my core conceit diffusion theory. Core conceit domain theory, not diffusion theory, and then the core conceit diffusion model, which is the mathematical representation of that theory, and diving deeper into mathematical representations of rap, and then the structures that spill out of that to domains. So the compositional structure, as you're writing the text that is produced from that writing, the source domain, the twin domain, which is the audience engaging with and making a lossy copy of the text in real time in their cognition, and then how they again add or subtract different things from that source text and create new meanings that weren't even existing in the source text. And then the domain, the discourse domain, which is the fourth layer, which is born out of us talking about the source text. So us talking about the song. So your podcasts and your magazines and your YouTube reactions and comment sections and all the other stuff where the everything but the song is occurring. Videos and photo shoots and even things like this are part of kind of discourse domain, which affect the how we perceive or interpret the meaning. So that the point where all that kind of ties back in is that's my area of research, approaching it from mathematics, but then also it ties back into things like the hermeneutical circle and uses of figures of speech, because these are all kind of components of the theory, and then they have to be expressed through the model mathematically. And so they're all kind of impingent and connected in this weird network and field. Yeah. So that's summer research. That's what it looks like. These are some of the like materials for it, amongst other things. Juice box. You know what time it is. If you don't know, now you know. Juice box vibes. So yeah, so that's what I do. I know some people want me to like, hey, is your course open to the public? It's not. Is your course online? It's not. Can I come sit in on a class? You can't. Will you teach this at other schools? I won't, because I haven't got offered to teach at other schools. But is there a way to kind of like bring people into it, in a public way, to give them maybe a little peek inside of what my other job is, which is being a professor, and some of the things that you do. So there you have it. Right? Any questions or comments or concerns? Somebody said show the book again. It's Fawnsworth's Classical English Rhetoric. And he basically just lists out all these different devices and figures of speech, and then he gives you examples of it in use. So but it's all classic. So he's talking about like Dickens, He goes from like, I think the 1700s, maybe the 1600s, I think, all the way up to the 1950s. So he doesn't go into modern things. He kind of keeps it focused in that space. So there's like a lot of Churchill in there, so a lot of kind of World War II-esque stuff, and he covers like speeches. So there's like Lincoln. There's references to Martin Luther King, of course, and just various orators of note. And I think one of the reasons that he doesn't go beyond maybe the 1950s, maybe because it becomes exponentially like just vast, the amount of work that's actually present. But then also I think it may be that things are cyclical, and what you start to see past that is just more of people kind of reproducing or rediscovering some of these devices and then creating versus a newness the first time or the most effective time or the most optimal time that a particular device was used, and that might be in an Abraham Lincoln speech from the 50s or something like that. So there you have it. Are you getting into dead idioms and metaphors? Yeah, we do a dive into dead metaphors, dead idioms, conceptual metaphor. You can study a lot of that with George Lakoff and his seminal work, Metaphors We Live By. And we actually did a lot of. If it doesn't go up to the idiom, dead idiom feels kind of like a oxymoron, because idiom is something that's very popular, but it's dead. So dead things that are popular. So really weird. But anyway. Excuse me. The idea being things that are just commonplace, so commonplace that started out as like special language as a figure of speech or identified as a special thing used in only special cases for special reasons, becomes normalized, becomes hyper popularized to the point where it loses the death in it is that it loses its special significance, and we don't realize that it's a metaphor. And so George Lakoff takes that to the extreme in a certain sense, in a good way, where common things that we do, like personification, we project and personify things so much that we forget that we're actually attributing personhood or human attributes to things like on a daily basis, and it could be abstract things like the bank. The bank took my money, or like I'm trying to think of some more. He gives like a whole list. Apologize not having a list of books right there, but I don't feel like getting up. But yeah, you kind of get it. All right, so questions. Are your classes available for recording or streaming available? No, they're not. That was this question. Oh, but wait a minute. Repetition and consistency, how does it differ in macro level in your perspective? Because you can have consistency without exact repeating of the same word. Again, repetition is you're repeating the same word over and over again. Whereas consistency, you can have the same theme and different synonyms that carry the same meaning across, and it can be consistent in terms of a theme. But repetition, consistency sits under repetition. How do I want to frame that? You can have repetition. No. You can have consistency without repetition, but you can't have repetition without consistency. So one is contingent upon the other. I don't want to start, my brain's going to break trying to figure out which one it is, but you get what I'm saying? You can have repetition and innately repetition is consistency, but you can have consistency without having repetition. And again, so there's just a class kind of difference, but then also just objectively, you're repeating the same thing. You can have kind of consistency without repetition. Make sense? If you're defining repetition as like repeating the same exact thing, right? Not doing a synonym, but actually like life, 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 right? As opposed to things that are like life, breath, existence, right? Those are consistent, but they're not repeating. Yeah? Okay, cool. Can you recommend some books to elevate our understanding of rap? No, because there are no books that really. I mean, there's books, but I can't recommend any that would do that. The good thing about rap is that it's audio, it's oral, and it's recorded. So I would just say go year for year. So start in 79, and get all of the works that were released in 79, and be careful because there's some works that are missed, at least early in that period, because it was kind of the Wild West. There are some works that were dated. So it might say this came out in 1980 or 1981, but it really came out in 79, and kind of vice versa, whatever. Maybe not later, but definitely there's a few works that are in that have that. So be mindful of that. But for the most part, go year by year and just pull out all of the records from that year, and then listen through, and then listen and see what changes the next year. So see the difference. It may not be too much of a difference from 79 to 80, even there it is, but it's very subtle. And then just go through that work, right? And if you really want to get really micro with it, do it by region. So you can go like what was released in this particular year on the West Coast, and what was released in this particular year on the East Coast, and maybe there's some stuff that was starting to get released in the South, and et cetera. And then you'll get a better understanding of how rap has kind of changed outside of a book, and then things that were you get this you get to see in real time, like things learning from each other, and certain things becoming archaic and extinct, and other things kind of evolving and becoming new. So I would say that, but I don't really have any books. There's a bunch of interviews. There's a great interview with Kool Moe Dee. So again, that kind of interview, finding those old interviews or even recent interviews of artists from that era or those eras, or speaking about that era, even though at a distance from it, it still has value. There's a book. Actually, I do have a book that might be good for you. It's an academic book. It's not public. It's not popular, but it's something that I have. That was actually very interesting. Bear with me. It is... Actually, I'm tripping. There's tons of books. There's tons of books. They're a little bit newer, though. And they're mostly academic books. Let's try to find this one. What is this called? Is that it? Yeah, there it is. I'm trying to show it to you. Yeah, it's called Collective Participation and Audience Engagement in Rap Music by David Diallo. Collective Participation. It's by that press up there. Paul, what is that? Paul Grave Pivot. It's a Paul Grave Macmillan. And actually this series, it's Paul Grave Macmillan. If you search that, it'll give you all of these books, these I feel like they're mostly like dissertations, or people's theses, but also pop like books that were written mostly by academics, if not all wholly by academics. And it's a whole list of these different folks from different institutions in different places, different countries. Right, I think this guy's from France. I think he teaches at Bordeaux, the University of Bordeaux. And it's just all these different perspectives on rap, like rap in Morocco, rap in such and such, rap from a feminist this, rap from a this, that, rap, da, da, da. More modern. But there's interviews in here. So this is why this is important, because remember I was talking about those interviews of vintage rap artists and stuff like that. He has a bunch of interviews, I think like Melly Mel and like different folks, talking about these particular periods of time as it relates to his thesis, which is collective participation and audience engagement. So call and response, right? And how that has kind of changed. And actually reading his work, I actually have this other theory that I kind of developed, that I kind of got on the back burner. It has to deal with the gamification of rap and how rap became a game. It went from being a performative crowd participation live event. Once it transferred into studio space, it became a game, similar to like Nintendo or something like that. And these became like the what am I talking about game, right? And that's what rap kind of flourished as for a period of time before maybe it went back into other things. So yeah, again, this Paul Grave Pivot series, Paul Grave Macmillan, there's tons of like rap books on various subject matters. So good luck with your search. I'll do a few more questions and I gotta go. Have you ever applied your model to a situation and solved it? If so, what coding language software did you use? So it has to get translated into algebra. Again, the theory is just, there's people who work on theory, there's people who work on applications. I keep application in mind to help kind of refine the theory, but for me, I'm more interested in just identifying and optimizing diffusion equations as they relate to rap and the diffusion of meaning through rap verse, which applies to all written verse in a certain way, but rap is a special case because it takes into consideration musicality and these other layers. But one of my friends who's a professor at ASU, who actually did his PhD, he did his master's at MIT. He used it, he does material science, and he used it because it is a diffusion equation. And to solve or use diffusion equations, if you want to call it that, you have to translate the PDEs, the partial differential equations, into algebra, and then from algebra you can like build things and solve. So he did it and created like a heat map or something out of it, which is really interesting. And then other people it's more so used as just kind of a theoretical frame to look through. Can you plug in and put things in? For sure, but it challenges you again to you need variables, you need values for the variables for the data. So again, it's pulling in the data sets, cleaning the same way if you had any equation, you need values to plug in. And how do you value a simile? So that's kind of the next layer of work, is valuing the devices and then kind of plugging them in, which it's not as hard as it sounds because you have a lot of pre-existing things that do that. So you have a lot of stuff from machine learning and things like, what do they call those things? Starts with an F. Not tokens. Brain fart. Not factors. Anyway, it'll come to me. It'll just pop up. But there's pre-existing things of valuations of things like that have been kind of tokenized in a certain way and given kind of numerical values. And whether they do it kind of like in semantic space or in kind of these fields and Maybe it's like by association, clustering, and stuff like that, blah, blah, blah. So there's ways to kind of do it. It's just a matter of doing it. And then what's your intended goal? And like, what's the goal? So the goal for me is less about giving a final score to a verse, a qualitative score, which you could do, but more about applying this in the compositional space where you're creating through a particular framework that is rather rigorous and keeps you kind of locked in and in step with the goals of what you're trying to do and optimizing that kind of goal set, optimizing your stack, which is a problem, which is a solve. So that's a solve in and of itself. Just again, applying the models to the creative process in a way that a writer can absorb it and use it. And it solves the problem of people of drift. I don't know what, I think you put it in Python to answer your thing about the coding language. I think it was all Python. I'll do a couple more. Do you think it's important to read literature to understand more complex lyrical raps? To understand? I don't know. So again, the question that you asked has problems. So is it because understand is somewhat of a vague, it's a relative. Like what do you mean understand? And then it goes back to the hermeneutical part, which is why the study of hermeneutics is important, because it's going to redefine understand. It's going to lock in on a word like understand and like, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to understand? And that may seem very reductive, but again, this is what I do. I don't really apologize for that. I know some people feel like you're getting off topic or you're not answering the question, but it's like the research and a lot of this theory and understanding this theory is understanding that how to properly design a question, because the questions are vague or the questions don't have they're counterintuitive or they actually answer the question. They're not questions. They're actually an answer, and it's really just a provocation for response. It's not really pursuing the interrogative function of what a question is supposed to do, acting out of ignorance. So less people acting out of ignorance, really wanting knowledge, they have full understanding of their goal, and they just want to see if somebody either agrees with their understanding or don't, and then it becomes provocative, right? So the challenge becomes designing questions with intentionality based on having a full understanding of what understanding means and how things impinge upon understanding. So with that in mind, do I think it's important to read literature? Yes. Do I think it's important to read literature outside of rap to understand rap better? Yes. Do I think that it's important to listen to rap to understand literature better? Yes. Classical literature, yes. Do I think they're not just one and the other, right? They're unified. Hopefully there's a field of meaning and everything operates in this discourse space where all these things are kind of being talked about and these texts are being, there's a lot of intertextuality, which is the term for it, the proper term for it, where these different texts are interfacing and interacting and changing in competition and in conversation and compilation, coordination and cooperation with each other. And would you have a better appreciation for all of it as a whole if you were reading and diving into literature which describes and analyzes meaning itself in all the fields that are related to meaning? Yes. Yeah. With a little stank on. All right, we'll do one more and then we're going to bounce. What is it? Do you have any peer-reviewed research papers done on this very developing connection? Will you consider an internship? Do I have any peer review? I'm not writing yet. I'm not writing anything yet. I'm not doing any papers. I have a preprint of the CD, the Conceit Diffusion piece, but I did some articles with a professor, Brandon at Yale. We co-authored some more popular articles, but not anything that you're talking about. How do choruses and hooks differ? So anything could be a hook. A hook is just something that catches you, right? So a lot of hooks are ad-libs, or a lot of hooks are those signature sayings of an artist. That's the hook. And that hook is so strong. I mean, it grabs you so tightly that people survive just on their hooks. That's the power of a hook. So, it's a jingle. It's a radio jingle. It's I'm loving it. Right? It's all these things where you might not even eat McDonald's, right? But you'll take that hook of I'm loving it, written by Pusha T, I think, a rapper, and you'll start to apply that to other things. You'll basically start painting the world with that McDonald's jingle, either as an act of rebellion or as an act of subversion or something like that, or just it's just a part of your kind of muscle memory. That's just one example. So there's tons that goes back to things like dead metaphors and dead idioms and stuff like that, where it's just these things that are just in the milieu that take up a considerable amount of our deployed language, right? So a lot of what we say on a daily basis might just be these jingles and hooks, right? So you just go through social media. How much cap is a hook? The word cap, like that's cap, or on God, on phonem, on such and such. You could just have a whole thing of just on phonem, right? And that's enough no matter what you say. If you're doing this kind of inclusio where you're beginning and ending with on phonem, it doesn't even fucking matter what you say in between, which is why something like mumble rap kind of works. Again, because mumble rap is just so tonally and melodically slurred, like it's very blurry, if we had to give it a visualization. But it's capped off with all of this kind of hook and slang and stuff like that. Again, so when you think of like a hook, it could be anywhere. Where a chorus specifically is something that's repeated in a very particular section of a record. It's not just kind of randomly thrown in, like you're not like 7-bar verses with a chorus and then you come back. You could do that, but it's normally 16 bars or 8 bars in the chorus. And the chorus repeats the main idea and reinforces the main idea of the song. And the main idea is something that's somewhat spelled out. It's not just like a catchphrase or like a shock. It is actually like sentences, right? Which hopefully spell out the goal or the main conceit or the main idea, the main direction of a song or what have you. So a chorus is different. And then also if you want to talk about technically, structurally a chorus would be layered, right? So it's like of a choir and a chorus, so multiple voices. So you think it would be multiple voices versus like your main vocal, which would be like a single track, but you could do a doublet. So you think of like a chorus as a doublet or a triplet, whereas a verse might be a single with certain reinforcements and ad-libs here and there. So again, a chorus is more structural songwriting element, kind of standardized. They can be somewhat asymmetrical in terms of their structure, but normally they're in the same place in every song. Choruses are where the choruses are. Whereas hooks can be all over the place. Hook could be at the beginning. Think of a producer tag. A producer tag is a hook. Like, take key, fuck these niggas up, right? That's a hook. That's a hook. There's some choruses that can be hooks, but not all choruses are hooks, right? You can just have choruses that never hook. They never catch. They're just there to, again, to do the function of reinforcing the main idea of the record. Whereas a hook itself might outweigh the verses, the beat. In some cases, the beat might be the hook, if you want to look at it that way. Where you don't care what the artist is saying, you don't care what the main idea of the song is, you're just more in tune with kind of this hook. And then if you take that structure of chorus and hook, you can apply that, again, text-wide. Text semiotically is everything versus just books, written word. And you apply the concept of hook to the rest of the world. So you think of there's hook in architecture. There's certain cars that have a hook to them. They have something that appeals to you in a certain way, which like the Cybertruck is a hook, right? It's a really good hook, right? Is it a good chorus? I don't think everybody's in on it, but as a hook, oh man, it's there. You can't escape it. It's driving down the street, you're gonna look at it. You're gonna have an opinion and a perspective on it, but it's a hook. So you think a certain house structures, Jordans are hooks. Do they have a utility? Do they have a function beyond just catching your attention? No. You can say that. Like it does, but it's, Jordans are kind of dead metaphors in that way. They're a dead idiom because you're not playing basketball. The majority of people, the majority of Jordans in the world will never touch a basketball court. And vice versa. Hiking shoes that will never touch a mountain, or North Face jackets that will never go to the North Face, right? But they serve a certain function, but maybe not the function that they're intended to. So they kind of become hooks in that way, where a hook doesn't necessarily need to have a utility. Its sole utility is just to catch your attention. Cool. All right. That's enough for summer research. I hope you had found some value in it. And just to reinforce some of the books, we got Classical Rhetoric. I'll actually show you the Paul Fry lecture really quick so you can kind of, if those are interested. It's very academic. So it's not, you might fall asleep. You might not be able to follow along with it. It's Yale, so it's very, very rigorous in that way. But if you're interested to know, like, what is Professor Lupe doing during the summer? These are the things that he's kind of doing. Right. So those are the Paul Fry lectures. They're on YouTube. He looks like that. It's going to look like that. It's just a lot of that. There's like 14 or 15 of them or something like that. So check those out. And then my research isn't published yet, but it's not public facing, but it's there. All right. So cool. Appreciate y'all. Be well and have a good summer. Congratulations to everybody who graduated. And peace. And much love to you.